Today, we are here in New York to announce a historic arrest across a wide-sweeping criminal enterprise that envelops both the NBA and La Cosa Nostra.
When the FBI director himself stood before cameras to announce what he called insider trading for the NBA, nobody could have predicted just how deep this rabbit hole would go, or who would fall next. And the cleanout is so deep that insiders claim that the FBI is about to investigate the NFL CEO too. Let's break it all down. The bombshell. The morning of October 23, 2025, started like any other day in professional basketball. Players were preparing for the new season, coaches were finalizing game plans, and fans were buzzing with excitement about their favorite teams. But by noon, the entire sports world would be turned completely upside down in a way that nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, could have seen coming. What unfolded that day wasn't just another run-of-the-mill gambling scandal or a minor integrity issue that the league could sweep under the rug with a quick press release and a slap on the wrist. No, this was something entirely different, something far more sinister and deeply troubling. This was a full-scale FBI investigation involving organized crime, high-tech fraud, insider trading-like schemes, and some of the biggest names in basketball, all wrapped up in not one, but two separate yet interconnected federal indictments that would send shockwaves reverberating through every corner of the sports and entertainment world.
The men and women up here standing with me represent a small portion of the leadership team that brought profound justice in an era that needed it more than any. I'll just highlight some of the details in the case and the FBI work, and then you'll hear from the others. But as you now know, individuals such as Chauncey Billups, Damon Jones, and Terry Rozier were taken into custody today. Former, current NBA players and coaches.
Let that sink in for just a moment. We're talking about Chauncey Billups, a five-time NBA All-Star, the 2004 NBA Finals MVP, a player who had just been inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2024, and who is currently serving as the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers. We're talking about Terry Rozier, an active player for the Miami Heat who had built a reputation as a solid contributor and had earned millions throughout his career. And we're talking about Damon Jones, a former player turned coach who had been around the league for years and had seen it all, or so everyone thought. But here's where this story takes an even darker and more disturbing turn, a twist that would make even the most seasoned crime thriller novelist pause and reconsider whether their plot was too far-fetched. These NBA figures weren't just being accused of simple gambling violations or minor ethical breaches that could be handled internally. They were being charged in connection with two massive criminal operations that federal authorities had dubbed Operation Royal Flush and Operation Nothing But Bet, names that sound like they came straight out of a Hollywood screenplay, but represented very real, very serious, and very extensive criminal enterprises. Operation Royal Flush, according to the detailed 22-page federal indictment, was a sophisticated scheme involving rigged high-stakes poker games that had been running for years, dating back to at least 2019. These weren't your typical Friday night poker games with friends where someone might try to sneak a peek at another player's cards. No, these were elaborate, technologically advanced operations that used cutting-edge cheating devices that would make even the most creative con artists jealous of their ingenuity and audacity. The games allegedly utilized altered shuffling machines that had been secretly modified to read card sequences and wirelessly transmit this information to off-site operators who would then relay the data back to conspirators at the table through various covert communication methods. They employed X-ray tables, yes, you read that correctly, actual X-ray tables that could view face-down cards in real time, giving the house an unprecedented and completely unfair advantage. They used specially marked decks that were invisible to the naked eye, but could be read crystal clear through specialized glasses or contact lenses worn by insiders at the table. And they had hidden cameras strategically placed throughout the venues that would feed live data to sophisticated algorithms designed to predict hands and ensure consistent wins for the house, creating an illusion of fair play while systematically defrauding unsuspecting victims. These games took place in some of the most exclusive and luxurious locations you could imagine: high-end apartments in Manhattan, sprawling estates in the the Hamptons, where the wealthy and famous gather during the summer months, casino-adjacent venues in the glittering lights of Las Vegas, and upscale spots in the sun-soaked paradise of Miami. The conspirators specifically targeted wealthy individuals they referred to internally as fish, unsuspecting high rollers with deep pockets who could afford to lose substantial sums of money without immediately going bankrupt, and they lured these victims in with promises of rubbing elbows with celebrities and playing alongside famous athletes and coaches. That's where figures like Chauncey Billups allegedly came in, serving as what prosecutors called face cards, recognizable personalities whose mere presence would add an air of legitimacy to these underground games and make them irresistible to starstruck targets who couldn't pass up the opportunity to play poker with an NBA legend. And according to the indictment, one documented 2019 Las Vegas game allegedly defrauded victims of $50,000 in a single session, with Billups allegedly present at the table the entire time this fraud was taking place. But wait, it gets even more jaw-dropping and absolutely mind-boggling. A 2023 podcast clip from professional poker player Matt Berkey suddenly resurfaced and went viral in the hours following the arrests, racking up over 767,000 views in a matter of days as people scrambled to understand the full scope of what had been happening right under everyone's noses. In this podcast, which had been recorded more than 2 years before these arrests were made public, Berkey described in detail a rigged poker game that was built around Chauncey Billups, stating unequivocally and without hesitation,
"It started in LA and then it came to Vegas for a few days, and it was all built around Chauncey Billups. And I had heard about the game, and the person who told me about it was like, look, I know the game runners. I'm telling you 100% this game is on the up and up." And I was like, well, I know a lot of the people that are involved, and I'm telling you 100% that it is not on the up and up.
Yeah.
And we kind of went back and forth, and I agreed that like I just wasn't going to go play it, but I had some friends who went and played it both in LA and in Vegas, and it obviously like was for sure confirmed to be cheated.
The fact that this information had been circulating within poker circles for years, that people in the know had been warning each other to stay away from these games, and yet nobody had been able to stop it or bring it to the attention of law enforcement in a way that resulted in action, speaks volumes about how deep and how protected this operation truly was, and how difficult it is to take down these kinds of sophisticated criminal enterprises. But as shocking and as elaborate as Operation Royal Flush was, and make no mistake, it was absolutely stunning in its scope, sophistication, and brazenness. It was only one half of this unprecedented scandal that was about to rock the sports world to its very foundation. The other operation, Operation Nothing But Bet, was arguably even more damaging to the integrity of the game itself, because it struck at the very heart of what makes professional sports compelling and worth watching in the first place: the belief that the outcomes are legitimate and determined by the skill, effort, and determination of the athletes competing, not by behind-the-scenes manipulation or predetermined results. The Insider Scheme.
The first indictment involves 6 defendants who are alleged to have participated, one of the most brazen since online sports betting became widely legalized in the United States. This scheme is an insider sports betting conspiracy that exploited confidential information about National Basketball Association athletes and teams.
Operation Nothing But Bet was, according to federal prosecutors, essentially insider trading for the NBA, a phrase that FBI Director Kash Patel himself used during the press conference, and one that perfectly encapsulates just how serious and how damaging the scheme was to the fundamental integrity of professional basketball as we know it. This wasn't just some guy making a bet on his favorite team, or even a player wagering on outcomes he wasn't directly involved in. This was a systematic, organized conspiracy that involved leaking confidential, non-public information about injuries, illnesses, lineup changes, and even deliberate plans to underperform or tank games, all for the purpose of manipulating betting markets and ensuring profitable outcomes for a network of conspirators who knew exactly what was going to happen before the general public had any idea. The 6 defendants charged in this scheme: Eric Ernest, Marvis Fairley, Shane Hennon, Damon Jones, De Niro Laster, and Terry Rozier, allegedly worked together between December 2022 and March 2024 to exploit this insider information and place hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent wagers, mostly in the form of what are known as prop bets on individual player performances, focusing particularly on unders, betting that a player would score fewer points, grab fewer rebounds, or dish out fewer assists than the betting line suggested they would, because they had insider knowledge that the player would either be sitting out, leaving early, or deliberately underperforming. And here's where things get particularly disturbing and where the human element of this crime becomes impossible to ignore. Terry Rozier, a player who had earned over $100 million throughout his NBA career and should have had absolutely no financial need to engage in this kind of behavior, allegedly tipped off his childhood friend De Niro Laster and other associates that he was planning to exit a game early on March 23, 2023, when he was playing for the Charlotte Hornets against the New Orleans Pelicans, a game that would become the centerpiece of the federal investigation, and a cautionary tale about how easily the integrity of professional sports can be compromised when individuals prioritize personal gain over the principles of fair competition. According to the detailed federal indictment, Rozier played just 9 minutes in that game before claiming he had foot discomfort and asking to be removed from the contest, a move that seemed innocuous at the time, but would later be revealed as allegedly part of a coordinated scheme to manipulate betting outcomes. Meanwhile, behind the scenes and completely unknown to the team, the coaching staff, his fellow players, or the millions of fans watching at home or following along on their phones, over $259,000 in bets had been placed on Rozier's unders, wagers that he would score fewer than 15.5 points, grab fewer rebounds than expected, and dish out fewer assists than the betting line suggested, all based on the insider tip that he was planning to exit early and ensure these bets would hit. And hit they did, generating approximately $100,000 in profits that were allegedly delivered directly to Rozier's home in Ohio, where the group gathered to count their ill-gotten gains in what must have been a surreal scene. A professional athlete who had already made millions of dollars legally through his basketball career, now sitting around with associates counting cash from an illegal gambling scheme that put his entire career, reputation, and freedom at risk. But the most damning evidence, the thing that really made people sit up and take notice and question everything they thought they knew about the integrity of professional sports, came in the form of resurfaced video clips from that March 23, 2023 game and other games around that same time period. These clips, which had been floating around on the internet in various corners of social media for months, but hadn't really gained much traction or attention until the arrests were announced, suddenly went absolutely viral, racking up millions of views as fans, analysts, and casual observers alike pored over every frame, every movement, every decision, looking for signs of intentional sabotage or deliberate underperformance.
Terry Rozier and Chauncey Billups were both arrested today in what's been one of the most bizarre news stories in NBA history. Since part of this with Rozier, of course, stems from him allegedly faking an injury, I thought it'd be fun to go back and take a look at that game to see if we could find what exactly happened.
One video compilation, shared by sports influencer Dom Luker and viewed over 2.7 million times in just a few days, showed a low-light reel of Rozier's performances that seemed almost too egregious to be accidental. Turnovers where the ball would bounce off his fingers or he'd throw it directly to an opponent as if he was trying to gift them possession, missed shots that looked half-hearted and poorly executed, sloppy passes that defied basic basketball fundamentals, and defensive lapses that seemed completely out of character for a player of his caliber and experience level. A sports medicine doctor even analyzed the footage of that March 23rd game and pointed out something incredibly damning and difficult to explain away.
Terry Rozier played up until just under 3 minutes to go in the first quarter. Here he is making a drive. No hobbling, no grabbing, nothing that looks to seem odd or out of the unusual. With an injury, he's running up and down the court, seems to be just fine. You see it come back down the court here, cross someone over, make a pass. Again, still not hobbling, still not limping or anything at all on that right foot, which was allegedly where the injury was.
The doctor went on to note that Rozier sat on the bench for over 2 minutes of game time, which translates to approximately 5 minutes of real time, without showing any signs of discomfort, without having the athletic training staff examine him, without getting any ice or treatment, and without doing any of the things you would expect an athlete to do if they were genuinely experiencing pain or injury that required them to exit a game early.
We can see him here sitting on the bench after he's come out of the game. This is with about 2:12 left in the first quarter. And you'd think if there was some foot soreness, maybe you'd be seeking medical help. You'd be having your athletic trainers evaluate you, looking at things, rub it on your foot. No, Rozier just sits here seemingly carefree, not making any motion whatsoever towards his foot.
And then, in what might be the most suspicious detail of all, the kind of detail that a skilled investigator or a keen-eyed observer would immediately flag as potentially incriminating, Rozier only took his shoe off and started showing any signs of distress with just seconds remaining in the first quarter, long after he had already been removed from the game and long after the betting outcomes had essentially been locked in and determined. But Rozier wasn't the only NBA figure allegedly involved in this insider betting scheme. Not by a long shot. Damon Jones, the former player and coach who had been around the league for years and had built relationships and connections throughout the basketball world, was accused of leaking sensitive, confidential information about Los Angeles Lakers superstars LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Information about injuries, about planned rest days, about limitations on playing time that hadn't been made public yet, and that gave bettors with access to this information a massive, unfair advantage over the general betting public. In one particularly egregious example detailed in the indictment, on February 9, 2023, Jones allegedly texted a co-conspirator to place a significant bet on the Milwaukee Bucks in their game against the Lakers because he knew, before it was publicly announced, and before the betting lines could adjust accordingly, that LeBron James would be sitting out due to a groin injury that hadn't been disclosed to the public or the media yet. Approximately $100,000 was wagered against the Lakers based on this insider tip, giving the conspirators an enormous edge over everyone else who was betting on the game without access to this crucial material information. On January 15, 2024, Jones allegedly did the same thing with information about Anthony Davis, telling associates that AD would have limited minutes and would likely underperform due to an injury, even though Davis was officially listed as probable to play, which typically means there's a good chance he'll suit up and play his normal role. Again, approximately $100,000 was bet against the Lakers based on this tip, though this particular bet ended up losing, which, according to the indictment, led to demands for repayment and created tension within the conspiracy as people started questioning the reliability of the information and whether they should continue trusting these tips. Perhaps most damning of all was an alleged incident involving the Portland Trail Blazers on March 24, 2023, where Eric Ernest allegedly received insider information from an unnamed Blazers coach, someone who would match the description and timeline of Chauncey Billups, though Billups is not explicitly charged in the betting scheme, only in the poker operation, about the team's plans to tank games for better draft positioning and which key players would be sitting out in upcoming contests. This information, which would normally be closely guarded and not made public until game time, allowed conspirators to place over $100,000 in bets against the Blazers with confidence, knowing exactly what the team's strategy and approach would be before anyone else in the world had access to that information. And the connections run even deeper and even more disturbing when you realize that this scheme has direct links to Jonte Porter, the former Toronto Raptors player who was banned from the NBA for life in 2024 and who pleaded guilty to wire fraud charges after it was discovered that he had been involved in a nearly identical scheme, tipping off gamblers about when he would be exiting games early, allowing them to place profitable bets on his unders while he deliberately tanked his performance to ensure those bets would hit. According to the indictment, on January 26, 2024, and March 20th, 2024, Porter allegedly tipped off associates, including Long Five Pham and Shane Hennon, that he would be exiting Raptors games early due to fabricated or exaggerated health issues, an eye problem in the first instance, and a general illness in the second, allowing them to place successful bets on his underperformance while he played just 3 to 4 minutes in each contest before mysteriously needing to leave the game. The Mafia connection.
Not only did we crack into the fraud that these perpetrators committed on the grand stage of the NBA, but we also entered and executed a system of justice against La Casa Nostra to include the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families.
That's right, you heard that correctly. And no, this isn't some kind of elaborate prank or exaggeration for dramatic effect. The FBI investigation uncovered that backing this entire rigged poker operation were members and associates of 4 of New York's 5 major mafia families, the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families, working together in what prosecutors described as a rare and unprecedented level of cooperation that hasn't been seen since the formation of the Mafia Commission way back in the 1930s during the era of Lucky Luciano and the other founding fathers of American organized crime. To put this in proper historical context and help people understand just how significant and how unusual this collaboration was, these 5 families, the Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese families, emerged from the bloody Castellamarese War in the early 1930s and established the Mafia Commission as a governing body to mediate disputes, divide territories, and occasionally coordinate on major criminal enterprises that required more resources and manpower than a single family could provide on their own. But here's the thing that makes this 2025 gambling operation so extraordinary and so historically significant from a law enforcement and organized crime perspective. Broad collaborations involving 3 or more families are actually extremely rare in the annals of mafia history, despite what Hollywood movies and TV shows might have led you to believe. The families typically operate independently or in pairs, jealously guarding their territories, their rackets, and their sources of income, and viewing cooperation with suspicion because of the ever-present risk of betrayal, the fear of being muscled out of profitable operations, or the concern that working too closely together might give rivals an opportunity to gather intelligence or identify weaknesses. The last time we saw anything approaching this level of multifamily cooperation was back in the 1960s during the Bonanno War, when Joseph Bonanno and Joseph Magliocco of the Profaci family, which would later become the Colombo family, conspired together to eliminate the leaders of the Gambino and Lucchese families, Carlo Gambino and Tommy Lucchese, in an audacious plot that, had it succeeded, would have completely reshaped the landscape of organized crime in New York City and potentially across the entire country. But that plot was exposed before it could be carried out, leading to Bonanno's ouster from the commission and triggering a period of violence and instability that would ripple through the New York underworld for years to come. Since then, examples of multi-family cooperation have been few and far between, typically limited to specific operations or particular rackets rather than the kind of sweeping, long-term alliance we're seeing in Operation Royal Flush. According to the detailed federal indictments and statements from law enforcement officials who have spent their entire careers studying and combating organized crime, each of the 4 families involved in this poker scheme had specific roles and responsibilities that played to their particular strengths, expertise, and areas of influence within the criminal underworld. The Bonanno family, which has historically been known for innovation and for being early adopters of new technologies and methods, allegedly handled the procurement and management of the sophisticated cheating equipment, the X-ray tables, the rigged shuffling machines, the marked cards, and all the other high-tech gadgetry that made this operation possible and gave the house such an overwhelming and insurmountable advantage over the players. The Gambino family, which has extensive ties to real estate and legitimate businesses throughout New York City and beyond, allegedly managed the venues and logistics, securing the luxury apartments, the Hamptons estates, the Vegas locations, and all the other upscale settings where these games took place, ensuring they remained hidden from law enforcement scrutiny while still being attractive enough to lure in wealthy targets. The Genovese family, historically considered the most powerful and most sophisticated of the 5 families, allegedly oversaw the overall strategy and coordination between the different families, serving as the glue that held this unprecedented alliance together and mediated any disputes or tensions that arose during the operation, a role that makes sense given their long history as power brokers within the commission. And the Lucchese family, which has always had a reputation for violence and for being particularly ruthless when it comes to collecting debts and enforcing discipline, allegedly focused on enforcement and collection, using threats, intimidation, extortion, and even robbery to ensure that victims paid their gambling debts, and that anyone who thought about talking to law enforcement or backing out of payments would think twice before doing so. The 13 Mafia members and associates charged in this scheme include some heavy hitters and well-known figures from the organized crime world, individuals whose names have appeared in previous investigations and whose criminal pedigrees stretch back decades. Ernest Aiello, described in court documents as an acting street boss in the Bonanno family, faces charges of extortion and illegal gambling for allegedly threatening victims who were slow to pay their debts or who began asking too many questions about why they kept losing so consistently and so dramatically. Saul Becher, a Gambino family associate who appears to have served as one of the key organizers and coordinators of the rigged games, is charged with wire fraud and illegal gambling for his role in setting up the venues, recruiting the players, and ensuring that everything ran smoothly from a logistical standpoint so that the maximum amount of money could be extracted from victims before they realized what was happening to them. And Thomas Gallardo, a Lucchese family member with a history of violent crime and a lengthy rap sheet that includes previous convictions for assault and robbery, faces charges of robbery and money laundering for his alleged role in the violent collection of gambling debts, a role that would have involved threatening bodily harm, following through on those threats when necessary, and generally serving as the muscle that kept the entire operation running smoothly by ensuring that people were too afraid to back out or to go to the authorities. According to the indictment and statements from law enforcement officials, victims of this poker scheme lost at least $715 million over the course of several years, with one particularly unfortunate individual reportedly losing $1.8 million in a single session, a staggering sum that represents a life-changing amount of money for most people, and that was extracted through fraud, deception, and the exploitation of trust that these victims had placed in the legitimacy of the games because of the presence of celebrity face cards like Chauncey Billups, and when victims couldn't pay or when they started asking uncomfortable questions about the improbable losing streaks they were experiencing, the Mafia enforcers would step in with threats of violence, actual violence, extortion, and even gunpoint robberies to obtain rigged shuffling machines or to send a message that this was serious business and that people who didn't pay what they owed would face severe consequences that extended far beyond just financial loss. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, how on earth did the FBI uncover all of this? How did they penetrate what was clearly a sophisticated, well-protected criminal operation that had been running successfully for years? How did they gather enough evidence to bring down not just a few low-level players, but an entire network involving dozens of defendants, multiple crime families, and some of the biggest names in professional basketball? Well, according to reports and court documents, the investigation, which began in 2022 and spanned multiple years, utilized an impressive array of investigative techniques, including over 3,000 recorded phone calls obtained through wiretaps and cooperating witnesses, extensive physical surveillance of games and meetings, undercover operations where law enforcement officers posed as potential players or associates, and the testimony of informants who had intimate knowledge of the operations and who were willing to cooperate with authorities in exchange for leniency or protection. The scope of this investigation is truly staggering when you sit back and think about it from a logistical and resource perspective. The FBI coordinated arrests across 11 different states on the morning of October 23rd, 2025, taking more than 30 individuals into custody in a synchronized operation that required months of planning, hundreds of law enforcement officers, and coordination between multiple federal, state, and local agencies.
What we're announcing today is not just another takedown. It's the result of more than 2 years of coordinated investigative work by the NYPD's Joint Organized Crime Task Force and the FBI. 2 cases that exposed criminal networks led by 34 individuals who believe the rules did not apply to them.
The press conference held in New York to announce the arrests was, in and of itself, a remarkable spectacle, a who's who of law enforcement brass, including FBI Director Kash Patel, NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch, U.S. Attorney Joseph Nocella Jr., and representatives from Homeland Security Investigations, all standing shoulder to shoulder to announce what they clearly viewed as a historic victory in the ongoing battle against organized crime and sports corruption. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.